All right. Welcome to the KLAS In Session podcast. I'm Justin Long, Managing Director of Investor Services here at KLAS Research. And joining me today is Aaron Feinberg, a partner at Bain Company. Aaron, great to see you and have you join me for a few minutes. All right. Let's talk about payers. We've addressed the provider priorities. What would you, and I'll let you just underscore this, they faced their own set of challenges, and some of them are obviously common to what macro challenges that providers are facing in terms of the big beautiful bill. That's probably impacted more payers than providers, at least at this point, because some of those repercussions, as we cite in the report, there's risk adjustment scrutiny more than ever, and then they just have their own set of cost pressures around Medicaid loss ratios, et cetera. So in consideration of those factors that they're and really challenges that payers are facing, what did we identify in terms of our survey? What were their biggest priorities in terms of investment and spend this upcoming year?
Yeah, so we saw a pretty broad allocation of priorities here. I don't think it's quite as stark as we see in the provider side, where any kind of given functional area is way out in the lead, but some persistence in terms of emphasis on member care coordination and utilization management, and then some new activity, frankly, growth in importance in the network optimization and plan design, as well as the member and care navigation segments.
And I feel this way, but please correct me if I'm wrong. I think in terms of a clear ROI in some of these areas, and this will be a nice segue or transition to AI, but it feels like the traction or quantifying ROI on the payer side, outside of those areas you mentioned, some of the member engagement, some of those areas, is probably less pronounced than on the provider side right now. But is that a fair assessment, or you can call me off on that if I'm misaligned there?
Yeah, it's an interesting observation. I think what we saw is that payers they've not yet called the ball on ROI as readily as providers have, right? And we could debate what the drivers are. There is a bit of an undercurrent of payers actually just having greater sophistication than an individual provider based on the types of technology teams that they're deploying. So to some extent, we think that they are putting a higher bar on ROI. So the jury is still out. They tend to adopt technology slowly via pilots in a given region or line of business, and then roll them out more broadly. Not that doesn't happen on the provider side, but it's certainly a pretty pronounced behavior. So I think jury is still out, but in general, we see continued enthusiasm and people looking to scale.
And there's no doubt, I think every organization, rather what side you on, is emphasizing a focused ROI at this point. I think that's maybe a good summation as we look at really healthcare IT and regarding both payer and provider facing. What we've determined, I think, in our report is the sector is still heavily investing. They're focused more on ROI, but it's more around automation, workflow efficiency, and then naturally cost control. Let's move to the newest portion of our report, and that is AI. AI has been the buzzword the last couple of years. It's certainly dominating the headlines. I think, as our report title inferred, as you said earlier, and what our research confirmed, is we're now seeing a lot of these early pilots in some of these spaces becoming actually, they're getting traction. They truly are in a production mode. And I think we're now, naturally, we're starting to quantify and see tangible ROI outcomes. But what were the top use cases?
Absolutely. So the top use case in terms of both pilot and live production is documentation support. So scribe technologies, really ambient technologies. And it's interesting just to see the evolution in this category, because last year's report, we highlighted this as being way out in the lead in terms of pilots. And this year, they've just really built on that. And we see so much in production here. It continues to be the top use case by a decent portion. But it's interesting if you look at the next few, CDI medical coding, and prior auth. I think these fall pretty squarely within rev cycle, and documentation support and scribe, we think is a key input into revenue cycle. So again, this further kind of emphasizes the point that we made in terms of RCM as a category of overall investment. And I think it's interesting just to think about, frankly, the further collapse of some of these categories such that vendors operate across multiple domains and grow their platform a lot more. And that was frankly the topic that we spent time together at our summit talking with Shiv Rao about. So Shiv is the CEO of Abridge, which is one of the companies that has established a nice early position in the ambient space. And I think our audience was much more focused on, frankly, other categories and where they could go beyond ambient, recognizing that this is a category that's so much so in the lead. They wanted to really talk about what's next. So I'm kind of curious, Justin, what you see and what you took from that conversation.
No, I think that's a great reference point, and we're doing so much on the whole ambient speech research, and you know what, a year ago, 10 months ago, a lot of pilots weren't quite sure what traction they would get. Now we're seeing health systems truly lean in and actually seeing ROI. I think it's interesting, and you refer to this. What we're seeing, I think we're going to see a coalescing of not only, I mean, as you talk about CDI and ambient speech, but really where does that merge into the whole RCM life cycle, and particularly coding, right? As we look at medical coding and outsourced coding, you know, Shiv even said this and has told us this regularly. He's not stopping at just ambient speech and clinical documentation. Naturally, it's as we look at denials and this back and forth that goes on between providers and payers, how do we reduce those denials and how do we improve outcomes? I think naturally a lot of these segments will consolidate.
What was interesting is I think Shiv has been out in public talking about the growth of his firm beyond not only, you know, documentation support and, you know, how he's moving into broader rev cycle. But Abridge is talking, frankly, about addressing some of the payer dynamics. As you're talking about denials, I think the vision is, can you go upstream and prevent those from being denied to begin with? And I think that's where a lot of the energy is within rev cycle, and it's makes complete sense that that's where the energy is in AI within rev cycle. So not only is it rev cycle, but it's frankly moving earlier and earlier. So most of the activity is around mid-cycle and front end as opposed to traditional back end. So really interesting to see all of the excitement around CDI coding prior auth as opposed to something like denials and underpayments. Because I think if we were to do this survey or to talk to providers about where they were focusing their energy 5 years ago, it all would have been on the back end. And frankly, many of them would not have even acknowledged CDI as part of rev cycle or part of their purview.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at that whole adjudication process, it's so burdensome and you know, labor laden, right? So you said it so well. There's at the front end, if we can reduce a lot of that mid-cycle, that's certainly going to, I think, focus on and put the emphasis on reducing a lot of this back and forth and cost savings and even labor, you know, a lot of these tasks that are on that front end. So no doubt about it. In terms of AI on the payer side, I think the areas that we were seeing it most common, and this was obviously in our survey, is call centers and member engagement. Do you feel like on the payer side, and this is maybe a similar question to what I asked you earlier, but as it relates to AI, do we have as much traction? Is it more experimental over there? I think on the member engagement side, there's no doubt. I think that's been adopted, and we're seeing some good returns there. But what about some of these other areas around risk adjustment? What's your feeling there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what we see on the payer side is, frankly, a lot of the energy being in categories that other business models and businesses are leaning into more broadly, right? If we zoom out and talk about AI even beyond healthcare, one of the biggest applications that we see, certainly across our work at Bain Company, is around call center operations. So it makes sense that payers are focusing here. This is where there is immediate ROI, both as on cost as well as just driving that member experience, which is so important to overall star rating. So consistent with some of our hypothesis in terms of where people are leaning in. Maybe not the most imaginative category to be leaning in, but I think people are looking to put runs on the board and prove out some of those early returns from AI and kind of go from there. I think it's also not surprising that people are focused on risk adjustment, just given what's been happening to MLR and how competitive star ratings have become. People are looking for every last advantage to drive that incremental risk adjustment. And we're also seeing a transition, frankly, from retrospective risk adjustment to concurrent and prospective. So payers are looking for tools that can help them in that journey and frankly help them better collaborate with providers to drive some of that risk adjustment.
Yeah, that's a natural parallel, right, between providers on the front end and, as you talk about, more perspective on the payers. It always baffles me that it's so difficult sometimes to get these folks in the same room to have the discussions, and I think we're making some headway with our own K2 conference that brings payer providers together. But why they have opposite goals and objectives, we're really all seeking the same thing in so many ways, right, as we utilize these technologies and they work together. But as we talk about these AI pilots to production, every company now that says they have some AI, right? They have an AI, and again, it could be NLP or whatever it may be, but they are now an AI company in healthcare. And in fact, I just actually talked to a vendor recently who said, even though we may not have front and center AI functionality in our business, we have to represent that we're an AI company, and we'll feel like we'll not be competitive anymore. So that said, that makes it even more harder or more difficult for our providers in their decision-making process. And so this really leads to my question, maybe to discuss a little bit. How do healthcare organizations avoid this pilot fatigue as opposed to having these, really, what would you call them, successful, repeatable one-offs that we're, kind of seeing right now amongst Ambi and some of these other areas? How do they manage that?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult to be a health system CIO these days, I think, just in terms of navigating the barrage of vendors and ecosystem participants coming your way. Everyone has shiny toys, and it becomes really difficult to figure out what's legit from the outside in. Even, in demos, it becomes really difficult. So I think organizations need to, I'm assuming this was part of your intent, but they need to partner with folks like KLAS who are looking across the entire ecosystem and giving color around what some of those success stories really are. I think, no surprise, but in the provider environment, most folks are not really looking to be the first customer or an early adopter of solutions. They're looking to be fast followers. There's obviously a cohort of leading academics that pilots themselves as being innovative and being on the cutting edge. But most of the market is inherently kind of waiting for those to really have the successes and failures and then just looking to replicate. So I think we'll see some level of conservatism continue to play out here.
I think so too. And that really wasn't a tee up for you to call out KLAS, but I appreciate you taking the bait, Aaron, or at least leading and saying that. But no doubt, we're doing so much work right now around AI, and it's just validating these use cases. And we know there's some categories, as we've talked about today, right? Segments that truly are leaning in, they are seeing an ROI. But there's a lot of other areas that and spaces that say, yes, we do have the functionality, we do have the shining object, and that's really one of our key focuses and initiatives on our AI studies and ongoing research. So we're hoping to unveil more there over the coming months and year there as we see this evolve. While we're on AI, maybe just a couple more discussion points, if you will. And as we look at AI with providers, and it is difficult for CIOs or other decision makers really to kind of sort through the noise, right, at the moment. But maybe from a vendor perspective, how do leading vendors make AI stick?
Yeah, so one of the interesting dynamics that we've been working through with several of our clients over the last few months is frankly how to enable providers and payers to really take advantage of these solutions and create changes in their workflow and productivity, right? So I think we see across our client base that where folks adopt technology without deep process change, they fall into this trap of incrementalism, where the solution may save their providers or team members 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. That's enough to get an extra coffee or to take a break from move off the shift for a minute, but it's not really going to move the needle in terms of improving your financial outcomes or stability. So we're seeing people need to really redesign process, get deep, rethink the entire kind of workflow that they're driving. And that's where the change really comes. And from a vendor's perspective, this becomes difficult to enable because particularly if you're a software vendor, you're giving technology, but you don't really have full visibility, at least historically, in terms of how your customers are putting this to use and an ability to really drive change in workflow. So I think what we're seeing and will see over the next couple of years is frankly a big emphasis on solution engineering. And Palantir has popularized the term forward deployed engineers. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in healthcare over the next few years, which is really organizations pairing some of their software with engineer and solution architects that will go on site and help organizations really redesign their workflow and drive true value out of the software applications that they're investing in. And that will also provide some stickiness, right? Because once you've re-engineered the process of the organization, it becomes a lot harder to rip out that software and go to something else.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think you said it well too, in terms of as we look into 2026, adding to it, it really is what companies are going to focus on automation, productivity, and as they do so, I think those are ultimately going to be successful vendors. And I think the other caveat here is partnership, right? We continue to hear that in healthcare. It's emphasized over and over by our provider and payer leadership. They're looking for partners, not necessarily for product and software. Healthcare IT remains a big priority. Investment is, I don't think is necessarily, again, there is some thawing. I'm cautiously optimistic that it'll continue to pick up in 2026 as there's a lot of capital deploy naturally. And and there's some still valuation, probably some disparity there or chasm, if whatever term you want to use between, but real hard ROI, strong winning companies are getting those valuations, and I think we'll continue to do so. So with that said, I know we're coming up on time, but I think the message is bottom line. Healthcare IT is growing. It's more focused, probably more emphasis on strategy, automation, integration, and sustainability and value creation. But as those things happen, I'm excited for our collaboration next year and our ongoing collaboration, Aaron. I appreciate you taking some time.
Thanks, Justin. No, I think you covered it well. I think we continue to be excited about the opportunity for providers and payers to invest in technology and drive operational efficiency and, frankly, better achievement of their individual missions. And we think this provides a pretty significant opportunities for investors to really get behind. So lots of opportunity, lots of dry powder. We think there's going to be continued investment, recognizing that we're at a state of maturity where, it's not a simple set it and forget it, like we were right around the time of the High Tech Act, where you could just benefit from this gigantic penetration curve across all of HCIT. We're getting into maybe more of the middle innings where people need to really focus on some of the operational improvement and realizing some of the value, but really interesting time in the market and frankly an exciting one for us and our investor clients.
I would 100% agree. Well, for our listeners, we appreciate you joining us today. And if you have not had an opportunity to read or consume the KLAS Bain 2025 report, you certainly can go to the KLASresearch.com website, bain.com. Reach out to your respective point of contact at either organization, and we'll be happy to provide that for you.